Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the courtroom. Could the court officer please call the case?
Good morning, Mr. President, Your Honors. Situation in the Republic of Uganda, in the case of the prosecutor versus Dominic Ongwen, case reference ICC 0204-0115, and for the record, we're in open session.
Thank you. I ask for the appearances of the parties. First, the prosecution, Mr. Gumpert.
May it please Your Honours, my name is Ben Gumpert. With me today in court, Adeshola Adebayojo, Colin Black, Colleen Gilg, Betty Hochler, Pubudu Sachitanandan, Cameron Chowdhury, Shkelzen Zaneli, Ramu Fatima Bitte, and Haido Duk.
Thank you very much. And for the legal representatives of the victims, Ms. Masida.
Good morning, Mr. President, Your Honors. For the common legal representative team appearing today, Mr. Orcholona Ransetse, Ms. Caroline Walter, and myself, Paulina Masida.
Thank you. And Ms. Hurst.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honours. My name is Megan Hurst. With me, Anushka Semi.
Thank you. And for the defense, Mr. Ayena, please. Microphone, please. No, it should be fine now.
Yeah. Good morning, Mr. President and Your Honors. I am Crispus Ayena Odongo. I am assisted today by Chief Tako Acheleke, co-counsel, Madame Beth Leon, co-counsel, and Abigail Bridgman, Michael Rose, Thibaut Banovich, Eniko Sandor, Insuti, Roya Yena, and our client, Mr. Dominic Ongwen.
And Mr. Tom Ophoff, I think.
Last but by no means least,
Yes. Owiso too.
Tom Oboff and Owiso.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The defense presentation of its evidence is set to commence on 1st October. Today, however, we convene in order for the defense to be given an opportunity to present its opening statement. Let me very shortly explain what the purpose of the opening statement is. The defense is here today to provide an explanation as to what it expects its evidence to show in the course of the coming month. This has been done similarly during the prosecution and LRV opening statements at the commencement of the trial. It is only during the closing statements that the participants will have the opportunity to raise arguments or challenges against the evidence of others. A short procedural issue before we start with the defense presentation. Before we move to your opening statement, the Chamber recalls that pursuant to paragraph 7 of Decision 1021, it ordered the defense to certify that it had provided all witness information forms to the VWU for its defense case. On 2nd July, the defense informed the Chamber it had provided 52 witness information forms to VWU, and only 13 remained outstanding. Could the defense provide us, the Chamber, with a further update on this matter? Mr. Ophoff, please.
Sorry, Your Honor, this was actually on my list of things to do for tomorrow when we are not in court. If I'm not mistaken, I've been checking with VWU, but I think we've done all except for the few that we're not allowed to contact right now. The D35, 36, those few people. So I think, but there might be one or two normal ones remaining.
So then I think I can thank you at this moment on behalf of the Chamber for complying largely with the order of the Chamber. Thank you very much. I will give now the floor to whoever wants to start with the opening statement. I don't know who wants to have the floor. Mr. Ayena, please.
Mr. President, it was designed that I have the floor. Mr. President and Your Honors, You have allotted us 5 hours within which to present our opening statement. I hope this will not include the time taken for introduction and making your opening comments. I have decided, Your Honor, to divide this role into 3 parts, with 2 of my co-counsel. I shall deal with an overview of the case. Counsel Charles Tako Acheleke will deal with the modes of liability, while Counsel Beth Leon will deal with matters to do with fair trial. Mr. President and Your Honors, it would be an understatement to say that the task before you in dealing with this case is a most unenviable one. This is because the case is peculiar in many fundamental respects. Firstly, never before has the world witnessed a conflict so complex in nature, steeped in metaphysics and spiritualism, that forms the contextual basis of this case. The conflict that dazzled the world by its intensity, mindlessness, and protraction on both sides of the protagonists was in a class of its own. Secondly, the accused, who is the subject of this interrogation, was just a child. When he was abducted, brutalized, and made in the bush with a mind of no mind of his own. Thirdly, Your Honors, are called upon to assess from no precedent the impact on the accused, the spiritualism and mindless brutality on him, the coercive environment bound in torture, spy network woven around him, extreme hunger, the treacherous weather he was made to endure, and the constant reminder that he no longer had parents and home to return to. Fourthly, Your Honors will have to caution yourselves that the government of Uganda that referred the matter to this court and is the main source of the prosecution's evidence did not do so with clean hands. The adage that those who come to equity must come with clean hands must be held against the government of Uganda and the prosecution. All this may have to be weighed against the prosecution evidence, well aptly known for its blame game. Furthermore, court is cautioned to be mindful of the fact that this being a political case, those who have testified for the prosecution case did so well aware that they have to go back and live in a state which has every reason to hide their role in the atrocities charged before this court. Your Honors are faced with the gigantic task to determine a few unfamiliar questions. Firstly, whether the accused qualifies as a victim. If so, whether his victimhood ceased at any time during his captivity under the LRA. Did he, having been a victim, kept under the keen watch of Joseph Kony and his spy network and scare of spiritualism, transcend into a perpetrator? As the accused abducted at the age of 9 and spent nearly 27 years under the vicious grips of the LRA, become an adult in terms of mind transformation. And more poignantly, Your Honors, we'll have to decide whether the accused, like many of his peers, believed in Coin's spiritualism. Did he believe he was helpless under the spell of Coin's spiritualism? If he did, how did it impact on his mind or on his mental disposition? Did it leave him with the presence of mind to act independently as a reasonable man, even after attaining physical adulthood? Much of these, Your Honors, have already been answered by some prosecution witnesses who testified before this court. The defense now only is left with the duty to bring witnesses to show that once captured as a victim, the accused was indoctrinated and made to live by the strict edicts of the LRA based on spiritualism, or die. Period. As such, the accused did not possess a mind of his own, save for the survival instinct he developed to navigate the harsh conditions of the bush, including the watchful eyes of the LRA spy network. The spy network varied, Your Honors, from person to person, depending on the value attached to the victim, as well as his perceived propensity to escape. The accused himself was constantly put on the radars of Joseph Coin for the reasons that will be shown to this honorable court. As was observed by many, this case raises many vexing justice questions. How should individual responsibility be addressed in the context of collective victimization? What practical options were available to the accused who was raised within LRA's setting of extreme brutality? Is it possible to achieve justice both for the accused, himself a victim, and for the victims of the crimes he's alleged to have committed? Mr. President and Your Honors, you will be called upon in this case to deal with the concept of complex political victims. The accused falls in that category. Children abducted by LRA, the accused inclusive, and used in the war in northern Uganda, grew up in one of the most brutal environments never before known to humanity, with little room for moral development that would enable him to later take independent decisions. Given the nature of the LRA and their modus operandi, we shall show that Dominic Ongwen's presumed culpability is sham. Your Honors, I'll go to a brief history and general background to the case. Mr. President and Your Honors, the political history of Uganda from 1966 has been and remains rapturous, with the people in power always pitting one section of the community against others. These have since been perfected after 1981, when the leaders of the current regime took up arms against an elected government. It will be shown, Your Honors, that the profound underpinnings of this case cannot be appreciated and understood unless a brief outline of the history of Uganda and the character of the current regime, which referred this case to this court, is understood to give context to the unfolding of events that is charged before this court. And Your Honors, the background history cannot be better narrated than by two or three Bush war heroes of the regime, starting with Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye, who was the National Resistance Movement Army political ideologue. He was the National Political Commissar during its first years in power. And I beg to show a video clip of what he has to say.
This will be on the Evidence 2 channel.
Has the country been independent for 50 years? And in all these 50 years, there has never been peaceful change of government. Every person who has come into government has bombed his way into government. And whoever has left government has been bombed out of government. That underpins the crisis in which the country is, that we are governed by guns, not by the will of the people.
Mr. President and Your Honors, that is a very apropos narrative of the politics of Uganda. The problem started from the political crisis in April 1966, which forever changed the history of Uganda. At that time, in order to quell a seeming secession attempt by the mighty kingdom of Buganda, Idi Amin, who was the army commander under Dr. Milton Obote from Lango, northern Uganda, and the executive prime minister of Uganda, who received the instruments of independence from the British, attacked the seat of the kingdom of Buganda. The king of Buganda went into and later died in exile in Britain. Their kingdom was abolished. This issue forever was to divide Uganda into two: the so-called Bantu in the south, west, southwest, some parts of the east, on the one hand, and the Nilotics in the north, on the other hand. But for the sake of clarity, it must be understood that until the advent of the current government, the rest of the country, including the western, southwestern, and eastern part of Uganda, mainly remained politically aligned and united with the North. But it changed at the advent of the current government. In 1971, with the support of the British and the Israeli governments, Idi Amin bombed, like has been narrated by Dr. Kizza Besigye, bombed Obote out of power. Amin was himself bombed out of power by UNLA forces, mainly formed of the Lango and Acholi tribes, supported by Tanzania Defense Forces in 1979. In 1980, UPC was voted back to power through an election acclaimed by the international observers as generally free and fair. Nevertheless, General Museveni, the current president of Uganda, was not satisfied. He had other ideas. Although he has never explained whether his loss of the parliamentary election at that time to his brother-in-law and his current Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sam Kutesa, was also rigged. He claimed that the general election was nevertheless rigged. Actually, he came third in that parliamentary election. General David Tinzefuza, sometimes called, now called David Sejusa, who is a master's degree holder, an NRA war hero, former commander of Operation North, former Minister of Defense in the NRM government, and lastly, former coordinator of the security services in the same government, had this to say in the same video which has just been shown to you. This is at 5:11, from 5:11 to 6.
For Mr. Museveni, everything is about power. His power, his hold on power. That's all he's interested in. Anyone who challenges his hold on power is an enemy. The National Resistance Movement, when we came, we were a conquering force. We were a conquering force. We controlled power. So when we came, then we controlled the resources. And then we controlled the political process. And then we controlled the diplomatic front. Political forces were co-opted into a militaristic establishment, military structures of domination survived in the so-called new state, which was perceived to be democratic. But actually it was not.
I don't know whether that takes us to the next one.
Museveni is a megalomaniac. He's someone who wants to control power, exercise it, and dominate the process. Everything that is done must be done in such a way that it must ensure the holding of the scent of control, relying on security forces, on the military, on finance control. That type of management requires extensive control. We were playing politics using command and control. When you have such a thing in place, then nothing can remove you, because virtually you control all aspects of public life. Hate must only go so far. Even if you take the northern people, there are things you don't do. There are things you don't do. If you hate people, you do not have to dehumanize them for 27 years. You do not have to perpetuate a war for 27 years because you hate people.
Alive.
If you get people and hide them in we had cells which were called andaki. Andaki, you dig ground, you dig trenches, and then you put in prisoners down under, and then you cover poles on them. They were excesses committed.
We were at Lumora.
Mr. President, and Your Honors, that is a narrative by no ordinary person in that government. So when we're talking about the character of that government, we could not have got a better narrative than from a person who directly participated in the formulation of these policies. Yoweri Museveni went to the bush and cashed in on the sentiments of the Baganda, who were baying for the blood of Obote and his northern tribesmen for their role in the abolition of their kingdom. It was the relics of this bitter war, coupled with the memory of the 1966 crisis, that set the stage for revenge attacks on the Acholi population. The NRA, which had basically failed to defeat a united UNLA, was waiting in the wings and immediately benefited from the confusion between the Acholi and their cousins, the Lango, after General Tito Okello was manipulated by the same machinery to bomb Obote out of power. Within 6 months, they themselves had been bombed out of power. And the NRM, the current regime, ushered themselves to the reins of power. As they fought the rebel war, NRM perfected the use of blame game. And this is very pertinent, Your Honors. Blame game, we shall show that blame game played a very prominent role in the charges before you. Perfected the use of blame game for winning support from unsuspecting peasants. General Eli Tumwine and Major General Kahinda Tafire, historical members of the NRM, are reported to have said during the burial of Professor Adonwia Tiberonda, a UPC stalwart in 2004, that during their rebel war in Buganda, they would, under the cover of darkness at night, camouflage and dress in UPC and UNLA uniforms and go to attack and wreak havoc on the population, then retreat to their hideouts in the bushes. In the morning, they would return to express sympathy with the unsuspecting peasants, lamenting how terrible the UPC and their army, UNLA, were. Your Honors, the strategy worked, and Luero Triangle became a recruiting ground for them. Mr. President and Your Honors, old habits die hard. It is therefore hard to believe that the UPDF, which is a continuation of the NRA, that successfully used the above described blame game in their rebel war, has suddenly forgotten it. There is a saying which was crafted by a writer from Nigeria, that the mouth that has tasted milk does not forget the taste of milk. It is for that reason that we invite Your Honors to be extremely cautious when considering and apportioning responsibilities for certain atrocities, especially those committed in and around the IDP camps, which had heavy UPDF deployments around them. Professor Alimadi and Professor Branch, who did a lot of research on the conflict in northern Uganda, clearly states that government soldiers usually perpetrated atrocities against the civilian populations and made them appear as if they were done by the LRA I shall show another video script here.
Anyone who wasn't on the LRA side saw as being against them. So they would use violence, horrible violence against civilians, that they, in their view, was meant to destroy government support, convince the Acholi not to support the government. And the LRA is not unique in this fashion. There's rebel groups all over, and state militaries all over the world that use violence in this kind of, spectacular, horrible atrocity in order to send a political message.
Ironically, in spite of the violence he has meted out against the people, he believes he's a crusader for the community.
Mr. President, and your honors, after bombing Tito Okello out of power, Museveni's primary goal was to divide Uganda into the north and south and map out the north for revenge. The new rulers designedly sent to northern Uganda, especially to Acholi sub-region, the Federal Democratic Army and the Uganda Freedom Army, UFA, forces allied under their command, but composed primarily of people from Buganda who had a grudge with the northern tribes arising from the unfortunate confrontation during the 1966 crisis mentioned above. They wantonly pillaged, destroyed crops, stole livestock, and most seriously committed the most heinous forms of human rights abuses on the population. They killed whole villages, raped both men and women in the full glare of their family members. This state of affairs was confirmed by the first NRA commander who commanded the occupation force into Acholi land, that is Major General Pecos Kutesa, who testified thus.
First commander there, from 86 to 90, just a few years, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90. Some groups who didn't have the discipline we had, now under our command, committed some atrocities.
Mr. President, when the LRA, after their precursor, the Holy Spirit movement of Alice Auma Lakwena, like many rebel groups in most parts of the country at that time, took up arms against the repression of the government of the day. The UPDF counterinsurgency strategy adopted in Acholi land was different from that in other parts of the country. It was characterized by brutal, indiscriminate, and rapacious response and retributions, both on the LRA, which held in their ranks innocent abducted women and children, as well as on the civilian populations. General David Twinefuza again speaks about UPDF committing atrocities against civilians in the north, dehumanizing them for 27 years, etc., etc. And I beg to put this on the screen.
Hate must only go so far. Even if you take that northern people, there are things you don't do. There are things you don't do. If you hate people, you do not have to dehumanize them for 27 years. You do not have to perpetuate the war for 27 years because you hate people.
pen cái tàu này cái quả giá kia bậc cha cái này chọn gọi là nào đừng cái chào vậy là xem đi đam này cái này đó qua cái rồi cái bà biết cái tẹp phim đi được ya cái am bên này con phải na yêu biết mình con mà ya đi phim nha anh biết gì lọc đi
Ka madong kema wadong giterwa ka wang gitegi kibir kin dan ke no gordan o kete en sigi bion sigi kichi ka kichiri kile kiri o mer mu cher bori kemere akidong we pe mer kenen makwa.
The government soldiers would dig holes into the ground and people would be forced inside those holes, and then the top would be covered with wood, with grass, and then with earth, and then that would be set on fire. So in other words, people are actually roasted alive.
If you get people and hide them, we had cells which were called andaki. Andaki, you dig grounds, you dig trenches, and then you put in prisoners down under, and then you cover poles on them. They were excesses committed.
Perdana i bumo i toma tot fulu idana yekon karma ju cha buku dana dong goy gu cha wa jo ken kire ro wa ro dong duny wa kan we duty wan kum ge mai yere ka.
Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch have documented these atrocities. Yet Museveni is untouchable. Why is Museveni untouchable? Because he has the protection of the United States government.
To add to that, Your Honors, is there someone?
Most soldiers in 2003, we found that some battalions were 120 people, a battalion of 730. Some brigades like 305 had 3 people, 3, a commander and his assistants, and yet it would take money for a brigade. So you can.
Mr. President, the last script is about the motive for prolonging the war in northern Uganda. It will be shown to your honors that the war in northern Uganda became a cash cow, and therefore nobody was willing to stop it in a hurry. Dr. Kizza Besigye, another NRA Bush war hero, and now turned leader of opposition, and held sway over the decision-making processes of how to defend the regime at the start of the insurgency, as this to say about it. And that is at 23:59 to 27:41, and then again at 34:39 to 35:10.
Any of the crimes committed by the LRA, but there have now been government soldiers coming forward and revealing that in many instances, government soldiers would actually perpetrate these atrocities and then make it appear as if the LRA had committed those crimes.
Em đâu vậy chứ in cả in là tiền tôi nghĩ cả tối nay toàn lùm mà tiệp ê tôi thì suy như nè nhà là mẹ đồng chi đã chào à Lok ngon wala ane. Uma ki tiaru bara kon ki mo am. Pen ke tamne kai waja tie ta kan chok wa ya na. Lumi ta wala chamni. Dam ni kete shuma kete ene da ko bi to ruwe. Ti ba ber ki tap twin. Beru ya ba. Ti am bene. Kon ka na yo beti min ko ma ya. Ya di fina amu ko ni lokki.
Ka madong kema wadong giterwa. Ka wang
I think that one.
Mayor, shortly, we should try not to see things twice.
Yes.
I know sometimes in the flow of the video this might happen, but we should at least strive to do so. Thank you.
I'm much obliged. Your Honors, it is therefore baffling that although, as mindfully noted by you, Mr. President, in your comments at the commencement of this trial, this referral was understood to extend to the entire situation in northern Uganda, regardless of who committed the offenses under this investigation. The prosecutors chose to ignore the glaring evidence of atrocities committed by the UPDF and their allies against the population of northern Uganda. If it was so understood, Mr. President, and your honors, doesn't it occur to you that there could have been a deliberate conspiracy of silence about the roles of the government forces and their allies? Isn't it intriguing that it is only this unfortunate former child soldier, otherwise a victim himself, who may ever find himself before this court for the crimes he knows not the origins of? Mr. President, and your honors, it is even more vexing for the prosecutor on the information given by the government of Uganda, that the prosecution on the information given by the government of Uganda has chosen to selectively handle the investigation and who to bring before this court. On the scale of what happened in northern Uganda, perhaps what is before you should have been the last. It will be shown that the government forces has more to answer about the war crimes of attacking civilian populations with which the accused is charged. Mr. President and your honors, I will now go to the emergence of LRA and the IDP camps. Mr. President and your honors, the emergence of the Lord's Resistance Army was a direct result of and response to the state policy that threatened to decimate a whole ethnic group and beyond. The statements of General David Tinyefuza in the above video narrative tells it all. As stated in the background to this statement, LRA was only used as a pretext for the government of Yoweri Museveni to execute its well-laid-out plan against the people of Acholi, particularly, and northern Uganda in general. The LRA presented itself as the perfect justification for the government of Uganda to complete its mission of bringing not only the northern, but some eastern tribes to their knees to ensure they may no longer be a political threat to their hegemony. They committed all manner of human rights abuses, not only in Acholi land, but in the whole of northern and eastern Uganda. They killed, they pillaged, and destroyed properties. They raided and took away a population of more than 3 million cattle and livestock and blamed it on the Karamojong cattle raiders. But, Your Honors, the people of northern and eastern Uganda are not fools. They know that the Karamojongs do not have helicopters with which, the helicopters which were used to identify where the animals were. The problem with the prosecutor's investigation has tended to show that the whole of northern Uganda, among other things, was occupied by only the Acholi, and that it was only the Acholi people who suffered. This is far from the truth. The whole of northern Uganda, and Lango in particular, suffered in equal measure. Evidence shall be provided to show that the LRA, as a matter of fact, started as a pro-people revolutionary army to counter the threat posed by to the Acholi by the then National Resistance Army, which became Uganda People's Defense Forces. At the beginning, the LRA found the population seriously exasperated and threatened by the onslaught of the government forces and ready to voluntarily join them for their own self-preservation and also to protect the community. Mr. President and Your Honors, this policy changed over time when the government devised a successful propaganda that militated the opinions of the population against the LRA. The population turned hostile to LRA and in fact became allies to the government forces. The LRA lost their recruitment, conscription ground as the population was no longer willing to voluntarily join their ranks. Faced with this new challenge and dilemma, Joseph Kony and his LRA changed tactics and came out with a new policy of forceful recruitment, conscription into the LRA. The accused before you, Your Honors, fell victim of this new policy of abduction and forceful recruitment, conscription into the LRA. As for the IDP camps, Your Honors, in our opening statement, the prosecutor recognizes that the civilians did not move into the IDP camps of their own volition, but were forced into the camps. She said, and I quote, "Violent attacks on civilian targets have resulted in those ordinary people being forced into internally displaced persons' camps." The issue for your determination, Your Honors, is who actually forced them into the IDP camps. Defense, Your Honors, will start from the premise that the context of this case, particularly what happened in and around the IDP camps, on the backdrop of the NRA propaganda of blame game enunciated above, it remains a curious matter of evidence to find out who actually forced the population of more than 2 million people into the IDP camps across northern Uganda, and what was the motive behind it. This may partly answer the question of the extent of atrocities committed in and around the camps during the charged incidents. Mr. President and Your Honors, defense shall bring witnesses who will testify that the establishment of the IDP camps was a government project and part of the war strategy against the population of northern Uganda generally, but the Acholi in particular. This can be explained in several ways. First among them being that in 1987, when the government started forcing the entire population of Uganda, of northern Uganda, into the camps, LRA was a force of hardly 500 men and women under arms. On the other hand, the NRA, now UPDF, had more than 40,000 well-armed personnel. That army could not have failed to contain a ragtag rebel group of that number, spread over the entire Acholi land and the northeastern and southern parts of Lango sub-region. Secondly, Your Honors, enforcement of the policy to force the population into the camps was ruthlessly ashed up. Bombs were indiscriminately thrown into the villages to scare the people to move into the camps. And at this point, I refer to a statement made by Bishop Ochola and the other lady who was scarred, who you could see burnt scars on. This is at 3640 to 3644.
Government
concentration camps.
Government began to throw bombs in the villages, forcing people to run into the camp.
This alone, Your Honors, caused many deaths which the government has never accounted for. What was the hurry in forcing people into those camps, even where there was no LRA presence? Thirdly, Your Honors, the government left the IDP camps to remain a death trap for the population. It never put in place any arrangement for life sustenance, such as shelter, food and water, sanitation, medical supplies, etc., etc. On the other hand, as they were forced into the camps, the people were not allowed to carry with them any livelihood supplies, such as livestock, food grains, etc., etc. Neither were they allowed to go back and pick them, or to pick whatever supplies were left behind. Meanwhile, the government soldiers helped themselves on whatever was left behind, some of which they brought to sell to the camp dwellers for those who could afford it. Before I am now coming to how the IDP camps were made a legitimate military, were made legitimate military targets. Your Honors, it is the case that before the government policy to deny the LRA support by taking people into the IDP camps, LRA depended on the population for food and for recruitment. As soon as the policy for IDP camps was put in place, many things happened. Number one, the government did not put sufficient security arrangements to safeguard the IDP camps. In camps, some of which contained more than 40,000 people. The government would put maybe about 20 or at least less than 30 UPDF officers composed mainly of badly trained LDUs. This made the barracks a soft target for the LRAs. Soft target for getting military hardwares. And as they became soft target for getting military hardwares, it also happened, Your Honors, that the IDP camps became the only place where food could be found in the whole of northern Uganda. Therefore, out of necessity, Your Honors, the LRA had to find a way of getting this food from the IDP camps. But before doing that, Your Honors, their gateway to the IDP camps where the food was the military barracks. They had to go through the military barracks. It needs no mention, Your Honors, that the death that finally occurred in the IDP camps were not a deliberate design of the LRA, but they occurred during the crossfires between the LRA and the UPDF and their allied forces. The worst thing that has happened, and Your Honors have not been assisted with, is that there have been no forensic examination of those who died to establish whose gun actually killed the victims. Were they the guns of the rebels or the guns of the UPDF? The other thing was worthy of note, Your Honors, is that the government of Uganda took a very reckless decision to attack the LRA, who were well established in southern Sudan, where, according to evidence available, they had robust food production schemes, and they were far away from the population of Uganda. But when they were provoked and pushed out of southern Sudan, they had to return home to find an empty space in the villages greeting them with no food, with no people to associate with, everybody put in the camps. It was for this reason, Your Honors, that the LRA attacks intensified in the IDP camps. First, against the military targets, and secondly, for purpose of getting food. Your Honors will also be reminded that the IDP camps became the recruiting grounds for LDUs, Arrow Boys, Amuka, and so on and so forth, and for getting informers for the government informers. Therefore, Your Honors, these are some of the reasons that put the population, the civilian population, in harm's way. Your Honors, I want to turn to the issue of the 70 charges. Your Honors, the prosecution has made very interesting, if contradictory, propositions about the number of charges in this case. They have discredited the public concern about the same. Dominic Ongwen, who was just a mere child victim, has had 70 charges against him. Not even Joseph Kony, who was Dominic Ongwen's boss, attracted so many charges from the charges we have seen earlier on. Perhaps this is the most, perhaps this is the biggest number of charges ever brought before any international court. But the prosecution says to downplay the enormity of their task. The prosecution says the large number of charges is not designed to show that this case is more serious than the case against any other accused person. Nor will a trial involving 70 charges last 10 times as long as a case involving only 7. This isn't an arithmetical exercise. Your Honors, as can be seen from the subsequent sentences, it is clear that the prosecution is not clear about their own case theory and strategy. They have, moreover, heavily contradicted their earlier statement. When Mr. Gambett said, there is a great deal of evidence. No wonder, Your Honors, it seems clear that the prosecution did not appreciate the enormity of the case they have brought against the accused, leading them to leave undone what they ought to have done, and they did what they ought not to have done. The prosecution, by bringing 70 charges against the accused, clearly decided to go on a fishing expedition and spread the net so widely that they failed to concretize on the key evidential parameters needed to convict the accused. The defense, Your Honors, is convinced of the considered view that every charge brought before court must be proved by the prosecution beyond any element of reasonable doubt, or at least to a level of sufficiency, meaning that the more the charges, the more evidence required. As a matter of fact, under the Rome Statute, it is a matter of arithmetical exercise. It is, that is why there is a formula, Your Honors, provided for appropriation of timelines and resources. Your Honors, it is the case of the defense that because of the romantic approach to the number of charges by the prosecution, the defense has been put to undue detriment, given the inequality of arms provided to the defense. Your Honors will remember that many times the prosecution has had to make approaches to make approaches to your lordships to allow for increased resources. But with the minimum resources, the defense team has had to burn many more midnight candles than the prosecution. Mr. President, maybe at this point, I would turn to who Dominic Ongwen is. Mr. President, and your honors, having given the background to the case and the outline history of Uganda, we deem it imperative to proceed to introduce Dominic Ongwen, the person, and to put on record his background, identity, and the vicissitudes and vacillation of his life in the bush until he escaped. From the onset, your honors, it can be stated without any fear of contradiction that he is clearly a product of the interplay between the politics of the current government of Uganda and LRA in the melodrama of the vicious conflict that engulfed the whole of northern Uganda and beyond for more than 2.5 decades. Mr. President, and your honors, even the most prolific forensic legal eloquence cannot change the fact that the accused before you is a product of the violent, insensitive, disruptive, discriminatory, persecutory, and repressive nature of the politics of the current government of Uganda, already ably illustrated above, and on the one hand, and the LRA. Witnesses shall be brought to testify and further narrate the story that the specter of the conflict giving rise to this case, as well as the charged crimes, have a direct link to the nature of the politics of Uganda. It will also be shown that Dominic Ongwen was a victim rather than a perpetrator of the political interplay in this conflict between the protagonists. And it is the case of the defense, your honors, that once a victim, always a victim. One cannot be a victim and still under the grips of the same system that victimized him become a perpetrator. But before going into any details about Dominic Ongwen, it is instructive to remind this honorable court from the outset that he is before you, your honors, not because he was captured, as is being peddled in some quarters. Dominic Ongwen is before you, your honors, because he surrendered and gave himself up. And it cannot be overstated that when he surrendered, he was aware of his pending indictment before this court. So, Mr. President, why did he surrender? Your honors, the reason is well stated by the accused himself. Right from the beginning, during his first interview at the American Army base in the Central African Republic, when he said, LRA is not my army. Your honors, what he was referring to was that the charges before this court are against the LRA, and therefore he did not have to fear to appear to exonerate himself before this court. He repeated the same at every opportunity, especially at the beginning of the pretrial hearing and at the commencement of these trial proceedings. We respectfully invite your honors not to take this conduct and gesture of the accused for granted. It should be interpreted in his favor to show that the accused is true to what he is saying, that he knew not what he was doing, and that in any event he did not have the intent to do, if at all he did, what he is accused of having done. But more importantly, he was acutely aware that, as far as he's concerned, the charges before you are charges against LRA as an institution that victimized him. From evidence available, Your Honors, from both his auntie, the wife of his paternal uncle, and the said uncle himself, who now plays father figure for him. The accused was 9 or 10 years at the time of his abduction. This evidence seems to be in tandem with the reports from those who were around when he was abducted, and who say that he had to be carried by other captives all the way up to the LRA's main military base because he was too little to walk. Dominic Ongwen was, as a matter of fact, born in or around 1978 in Chorom village, Kilak County, Amoro District, northern Uganda. Like many other children, he was a happy, harmless, and innocent child, enjoying the protection of his parents and the community. However, at that tender age, under the seeming watch of the government of Uganda, as he innocently walked to Lra Primary School in 1987, he was abducted, never to see his parents again. A dark cloud was drawn against him. All his hopes and the hopes of his parents and his community that he might grow into a useful citizen were dashed. As we have said before, Your Honors, Dominic Ongwen has now suffered multiple jeopardy. The first jeopardy is that he was denied his childhood. The second jeopardy, Your Honors, is that he was conscripted and kept as a slave under captivity of the LRA to do the job of LRAs for 27 years. The third one, Your Honors, is that when he gracefully found an opportunity to escape from the grips of the LRA, hoping that he might now reconnect with his community, alas, he found himself before this court. For more than 2 years now, he has been in detention, and we never know for how long this will take. The fourth jeopardy would be if, and God forbid, he should be convicted for crimes he could not have had the intent of committing, if at all he did commit. For the next 6 years or so, he was kept in virtual captivity under the most vicious regime of edicts after undergoing such indoctrination that has shocked the conscience of the world. Mr. President and Your Honors, all considered, it will appear like a mockery of the expectation of the institution of humanitarian justice that the government of Uganda, many of whose leaders should have been the first candidates to be arraigned before this court, rushed to refer the case against the accused person, among others. Your Honors, evidence will be led to show that Dominic Ongwen mirrors the state of Uganda and the state of Uganda and its prodigal child, the LRA. Helpless as he was from childhood, he was gripped by the Stockholm syndrome, by which he came to believe that he owed his life to Joseph Kony, the seeming demigod. He lost his true identity in the mire of the Bush War and became an instrument of Joseph Kony's war. Defense will lead evidence to show that once abducted, he was like all others like him who were abducted, tortured, and forced to watch violent rituals of people being tortured and killed. That, Your Honors, was the proverbial blueprint of his own indoctrination into the LRA. He was to learn that in the LRA, survival depended on total submission and loyalty. And as he was told to fight, the enemies were clearly identified to him. They were Yoweri Museveni and his UPDF and their allied forces, and not the ordinary civilians. Therefore, Your Honors, it will be hard to believe that a child who got his instructions from the beginning about who his enemies are would be charged or would be accused of intentionally attacking and persecuting the civilian population. It has been suggested by the prosecution that Mr. Ongwen rapidly rose in rank because of his unquestioning loyalty to Joseph Kony and his LRA. And his role, and he has also been accused of playing a prominent role in attacking the charged targets. Your Honors, that could not be any further from the truth. From evidence already available on court record and those we are yet to bring, Dominic Ongwen's rise in rank could be attributed to mainly 3 factors. Number 1, Mr. President and Your Honors, the period between 2002 and 2005 saw the death or capture of most of the LRA top commanders, who included Major General Tabile, Major General Raska Lukwia, Brigadier Kenneth Banya, Brigadier Sam Kolo, and Colonel Onen Kamdulu, to mention but a few. He was therefore only promoted to fill the void. And Your Honors, you'll find on court record a government-provided list of top commanders of LRA around this time. And you'll find from that list, Your Honors, that Dominic Ongwen appeared as number 36. So he was, by any stretch of imagination, not a centerpiece in the planning arrangement of the LRA. Number two, Your Honors, at this time, Dominic Ongwen was perceived by Joseph Kony as contemplating escape from the LRA. He had to be, to use my learned friend Ben Gampert's word, he had to be incentivized to dissuade him from escaping. And evidence abound on court record that Kony used mind games to keep his victims within the LRA. One of the tactics effectively used was sham promotions. And this is how Dominic Ongwen could have been promoted. And number three, Dominic Ongwen, even from prosecution witness testimony on court record, was an acclaimed, skillful, and courageous commander against the UPDF. Your Honors, the NAF Project, a campaign group, said of Dominic Ongwen, and I quote, "He earned the reputation of being able to emerge from the bloodiest of battles with no casualties among his fighters." Your Honors, Dominic Ongwen seemed, according to Joseph Kony himself, also to be a darling to the spirits. His promotion was therefore inspired or instructed by the spirits, and not because of his self-propelled, will. As for his loyalty, Your Honors, to Joseph Kony, if he was loyal, it was not for anything else but the reason admitted by the prosecution, Your Honors, that is, survival instinct to avoid Joseph Kony's wrath. And when we say Dominic Ongwen mirrors the state of Uganda, what is the state of Uganda and its leadership like? It is as described by their own in the video that has been shown to Your Honors. Mr. President and Your Honors, as someone once said, mean circumstances beget mean children, and the fruits rotten as they ripen. It needs no emphasis, Your Honors, to say that the mean circumstances in the state of Uganda begat Joseph Kony and his Lord's Resistance Army. Joseph Kony and his Lord's Resistance Army begat Dominic Ongwen, the accused. Your Honors, I'm being reminded that it might be a good point to stop for break.
I assume that you want to go to another topic, so I pick up your suggestion. We will have a break until 11:30. Thank you.
Much obliged.
All right. We will be back.